Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for the Hyperproof webinar on security certifications, how to achieve and manage them efficiently. Welcome. It's great to meet you virtually. My name is Jingsong Zhao, and I'm in marketing at Hyperproof, and I'll be your host today. I'm excited for this topic. We would love for this to be an opportunity to learn more about what you're doing. And so if you have any questions during the presentation, please just type them into the chat, and we'd love to answer them at the end. This webinar is also being recorded, so we will send you the recording right afterwards. We'll have about 50 minutes together in a presentation and then go into a demo of how it works and things work in Hyperproof. And then we'll have some time at the end for Q&A. With that, I want everyone to meet the speaker, Matt Lehto. Matt, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, no, thanks, JC. It's great to be here. Hi, everybody. I guess I'll even wave. But yeah, excited about what we're going to talk about today, and thanks so much in advance for your time, everybody. And yeah, I'll turn it back to you for now, JC, but we'll get moving.
Great. Matt, do you want to just tell everybody a little bit more about yourself, your role at Hyperproof, and kind of how you got to Hyperproof?
Sure. So obviously, everybody, that's like the younger version of me first. And sorry, I'm big about joking about myself. So, yeah, I mean, I guess just my my journey to Hyperproof. I mean, I've been with Hyperproof since the inception of the company, which is a little over 3 years ago. I guess I'm the chief growth or revenue officer for Hyperproof. But what really, attracted me to Hyperproof and what we are working to achieve is really, what we refer to as ComOps, but compliance, security, managing all the risk we're intersecting with these days is just so complex. And having worked in other organizations where we were dealing with those, being on this mission to sit there and really solve for these complex problems and helping organizations solve them was just really inspiring to me. And so yeah, I mean that's kind of my journey to Hyperproof. Just I guess a couple of other things about me. I mean, just where do I reside? I reside in Seattle, Washington, with my wife and 2 daughters. And again, I mean, I just would say thank you for spending time with me and JC. And looking forward to getting into the actual presentation, not talking about myself any longer. Anything else there, JC, or is it all right to continue?
Please go ahead.
Okay. So just to kind of jump straight into it, none of this, for everybody on this call, I have to assume everybody here with us today is either in the security or compliance space. And so these things are going to be very familiar to you. But obviously, it's a very complex landscape that we're all working within these days. And I don't think it takes much. I think we can pick up the paper pretty much any day at this point, and witness all sorts of kind of challenging situations and risk coming to life in real time all the time. So whether it's Accenture, whether it's Colonial Pipeline, whether it's solar winds, I think we all understand, how much duress we're all under in relationship to cyber attacks and people working to kind of undermine what we all are focused on and building our respective organizations. And so that's one obvious risk that's out there and we're experiencing in the current landscape. I think the other is, we're obviously just an increase in regulations in relationship to privacy and otherwise. And so there's just a real expansion to the things that we have to be concerned about compared to 15 years ago. I think that the next one, zero trust, is another representation of how much the world's just changed in the last 15 years. And I really equate the zero trust piece to cloud adoption. 15 years ago, we all really managed our infrastructure within our data centers. That's how we managed our businesses were managed on that infrastructure. And our primary concern was the top one around security, cybersecurity attacks. And as we started to adopt cloud solutions to sit there and manage our operations, which has been great in a lot of ways, but it also exposed us to a new risk vector that we weren't experiencing before. And that is really that, now the risk exists with our third parties. And so there was a risk transference and all of that. And that's led to an explosion over the last 15 years of basically security assessments and audits where we all ask that of one another and basically kind of adopt a zero trust mode of operation where it has to be proven in order for us to believe it. And so that's really kind of, I think, the risk landscape in a lot of ways that's changing. And I think what's interesting as you kind of pivot to the last 2 points is how scaling, you would expect that software and a variety of other solutions would step in and actually kind of help us as organizations scale and meet the kind of ever-changing landscape. But that actually isn't really what we've seen happen. What we've seen is that the economies of scale that you might expect to achieve aren't being achieved. And as a result, every change is incrementally adding either more work to already overworked people, or it's adding more cost, in relationship to adding more people to sit there and solve the problem. And ultimately, that really probably is not sustainable over the long haul. Um, and the other piece that's very interesting to us, and we'll talk about it a little bit more in this next slide, is just how much of the work is actually administrative. And we've done time studies, and I'll talk a little bit about a benchmark survey that we run as well that just speaks to how much administrative work is ongoing in relationship to everything we're seeing, and how that probably needs to change too. So just moving along to the next slide here, and just talk a little bit about, moving from kind of more of a what I would call a high level view to the more tactical point of view, is just how much the burden is growing for all of us as organizations. Most organizations that I meet with on a day-to-day basis are not just complying with one standard; they're complying with multiple standards. And so that by itself is just an additional burden that all of us as organizations are wearing, and it's very challenging for us, for all of us to sit there and deal with those multiple standards. A lot of times, what we see in relationship to that is it's not easy to understand the overlap between all of these standards. So we end up with duplicative controls, another inefficiency entering into the equation and making our lives harder, not easier. And so that is a challenge for all of us as compliance or security professionals. And then we talked about it on the previous slide, but so much of the work is administrative, and really evidence collection ranks right at the top for us as an area that is incredibly manual today in so many ways, and so it's just very tedious to collect all the evidence. And then the other thing that is very much a challenge out there is that we don't do a good job. It's very hard to collect all that evidence and then reuse that evidence. And so a lot of times what we see with a lot of organizations is duplicative collection of evidence, which there's the fact that results in more manual labor, obviously. But I think the other thing that we see a lot of is it starts to be off-putting to the people that are being asked for it, because they're being asked for it so many times. And I'm sure many people on the call have witnessed this. And so it's, the thing is that compliance, and we'll talk about this in later slides, but it's such an organizational wide effort. And so we can't afford to have people tuning out on that. And if this is one of the reasons we ultimately need to solve it, but it's a burden for all of us today. Um, you know, Inevitably you have to explain, and then explain again, and then explain again to a lot of different stakeholders exactly what's going on and how it's proceeding. And so that's another burden, and it gets more and more complex to explain. Per some of the things at the top around multiple standards. And ultimately, as we expand our respective businesses, the other challenge is it's more and more different kind of stakeholders that want some kind of transparency in relationship to how things are proceeding, whether that's governing bodies or whether that's our customers or even our partners. Um, what's interesting, so I alluded to it in the previous slide, is just how much of the work is actually administrative in its nature, and therefore, in a lot of ways, not particularly value added. We've run, as I stated earlier, time studies with our customers prior to using our solution, just to understand how much of the work is administrative in its nature, we arrived at the 50% in two different ways. One is the time studies with our customers, and then the other is via the survey. We run a compliance benchmark survey annually, and if you haven't had a chance to actually take a look at that, I would advise you to. I think we will publish that or make it available after this webinar. But it just points to 50% of the time is spent just basically in these very tactical work that's non-value added. And I started my career at Ernst & Young, and so I can't help sometimes but to think back to my consulting days. And in consulting, the hours are the thing that really matter. And it's hard not for me to look at 50% and say, well, if you're working 40 hours a week, there are 2,080 hours in a year. And if 1,040 hours are being consumed in administrative work, that's a pretty big tax to pay. And probably not, compliance and security professionals, rightfully so, because of their subject matter expertise, are expensive. So you look at that and, run the math, and at a blended rate of $150 an hour, that equates to about $150,000 spent on just administration. And I don't think that any of us want to do that. And past that, I'm sure executive leadership teams would prefer not for that not to happen either. So something's got to give there. But obviously, it's just an ever-growing burden on all of us right now, and something's got to change. Moving forward and pivoting a little bit, there's this view that compliance and adhering to and getting your SOC 2 Type 2 is somehow mitigating your risk, and that compliance is somehow insulating an organization from bad things happening. But as we ran our survey, what we were looking for is, where is that really true? And I think the reality is it's not. Taking a compliance focused approach is not going to protect your organization near as much as thinking about the risk that your organization's actually exposed to. And the data really in our survey really kind of articulate that pretty well. Organizations that really take a risk focused view first, and versus a compliance focused view, suffer far fewer lapses or security violations than organizations that take a compliance only focused view. And so, when we look at it, we think it's just really important. You ultimately need to think about both. And we ultimately think that they all kind of end up intersecting with common things over time. But one bit of advice we would have, based on what we see with organizations and also what we see in the data, is that taking this risk-oriented view first and thinking very much about, hey, we put controls in place for a reason. Why did we do that? We put them in place because they're supposed to mitigate risk first and foremost. It's a nice side effect that they can sit there and support requirements and a control and a compliance framework. And so we would just advise, thinking about it in that particular light. Moving forward, just shifting from to kind of a risk-oriented view and an operations approach, just some things that we would advise organizations to consider. One is, and I really just stated it, starting, I think, with the risk in mind is really important. And I don't think that that's new news to anybody, but I do think that sometimes we lose sight in the throes of what we do year in and year out, to focus on the risk instead of the frameworks and the compliance aspects. So So starting with those risks in mind, I think, is really important aspect of thinking through it the right way to really mitigate things, mitigate risk for your organization. I think the other thing that executive leadership teams need to understand, and I think many of them do, but many of them forget along the way, is that, um, you know, for one, the landscape's constantly changing, as we discussed earlier. But then past that, there is no finish line to what we do. It's an ongoing concern, and people need to understand it's an ongoing investment, and that we need to always be on it. And sometimes executive leadership teams can lose sight of that, and but it's important for them to have that mindset as it relates to the work that all of us are doing. The other piece that we think is really important is that compliance and security, and mitigating these risks. It is not just about the security professionals and compliance teams. It's about the whole organization. And everybody's sharing that set of responsibilities and really engaging in the right ways, is just so critical to actually solving the problem. Thinking that the person with the compliance in their title or security in their title are the ones that have to take care of it all, is really a mistake. And I think it's important that organizations look at it in that light as well. Um, Kind of pivoting to the operational side of it, and we touched a little bit on operations there, at least kind of some thought processes around operations. But then we think we've looked and studied DevOps a whole lot. As a software company, we obviously leverage DevOps from the engineering and product side of our organization, and we really looked at that. It's matured so much. They've made, all of us have made so much progress in relationship to leveraging the DevOps methodology, that we said, hey, isn't there an opportunity to leverage so many of those concepts in the way that we approach our security and compliance work, and in relationship to mitigating risk? And so another thing that we're seeing more and more is organizations actually orient themselves around that and actually adopt more of a sprint mentality about, hey, what are the objectives we're trying to achieve in this next month? And let's work through incremental improvements to what we're doing over time in structured sprints, versus just being so reactive. And another piece is, obviously, it goes without saying, standardizing the kind of compliance processes and the services. Um, I think a real important one that we're looking at from DevOps is automation. Automation is part and parcel to DevOps. It's a real important construct because it's how you can scale without adding tons and tons more cost. And we think the same applies here, in relationship to thinking about risk management and operations. Automation's got to play a critical component. And then, measuring and making sure that there's continuous improvement, this kind of iterative approach that's so prevalent in DevOps. We think the same thing applies here in relationship to compliance operations or risk operations. And what's surprising is we conducted our survey this past year, and we'll do it again this fall, is just how many companies are still in, and I think rightfully so. I think the tech community has not really provided great ways to sit there and solve for this, but 66% of companies are still very much in just this ad hoc reactive mode. And I really put it down to, when we're operating in spreadsheets, when we're operating in kind of a fragmented tech stack, it's just hard. It's hard not to be reactive. I don't fault any organization for being in that place, because I really kind of turn to the ecosystem that's supposed to support companies and say it's on all of us to sit there and find creative ways to sit there and support and move away from this reactive mode. But it's an interesting data point nonetheless. So pivoting and talking about just this agile, scalable approach, to IT compliance. I'm just going to move right past this, but it's a pretty picture of someone jumping rope there. And I think part of it is understanding what's our North Star, where are we actually trying to go. And this is a simple way for, we think about the ultimate solve to a lot of what we talked about in our mind is what we would call comm ops or compliance operations. I'll get into a little bit of what we mean by that, but part of it is just I think starting with the point of view of where are we today and having a north star of where we're trying to go tomorrow or in 6 months or in a year. And this is just a simple way to look at it, from level 1 to level 3. We think a lot of the organizations are unfortunately, in a place where level 1, where it's pretty reactive. There's this perception that it's all on the compliance person or the security person to manage. A lot of the work is done in spreadsheets or file storage and email, and ultimately, the workflows are not well constructed or repeatable. And a lot of organizations are in that place, and it's understandable, because solutions haven't really lent themselves to really solving that for organizations. But we do think that that's changing, and we think there's a way to ultimately, get to what we would this level 3 orientation, where there's so much of this that can be automated, where it can be more of a forward looking, not reactive point of view, but a proactive point of view about how to sit there and solve for these things. And ultimately, how to take software and a variety of other things to sit there and actually, allow for a level of collaboration that should be there today, that hasn't been well facilitated in a fragmented tech stack, but might be able to be well solved for in a ComOps platform. So understanding, whether you want to leverage this or another kind of compliance maturity, orientation, I think understanding where we're trying to go is an important part. It's hard to know which direction to proceed down if you don't know where you're trying to go to begin with. And so this is just some directional guidance there. Next, I just want to talk about kind of our point of view on compliance operations, and it's a build out slide, so just hang on 1 second here. But where we think it all starts is with the control. The control, I tend to think about controls as kind of the molecule or maybe even the atom, in an organization. It's the thing that was meant to mitigate a risk. It's also the thing that will help you sit there and adhere and to a requirement within a compliance framework. And so really for us, it all starts at the control level. And we feel like part of the breakdown has been that it's been inordinately hard to operate a control, effectively over time, especially when it's being managed in a spreadsheet where, it's text in a particular cell. And so control management automation is at the heart of solving the problem in our view. And then the next piece of it is all controls are supposed to be reassessed on a cadence. At least that's the best practice, but it's hard to do, especially when you don't have a solution helping you do it. Because generally speaking, by the time you've established all your controls, there are a lot of them, and understanding who owns them, what's supposed to happen when, is difficult to do. And so part of really enabling compliance operations or ComOps is actually making sure that that is well constructed and facilitated, and at the control level. And so that's really part 1 to us. But then after that, we've talked a lot about evidence collection up above and what, a time suck that is for organizations, and not particularly a value added one. So we think, what we're really focused on is, hey, we need to automate that evidence collection. And so, whether it's finding constructive ways to facilitate evidence collection at a manual level, but better, or whether it's automating it, completely, making sure that there are more efficient ways to facilitate that collection and to reuse that evidence is a really, really critical part of solving for ComOps. Next, we look at testing. And testing, it's great that you collect a piece of evidence, but ultimately the fundamental question is, are there any issues with the piece of evidence you just collected? And so testing is the next piece of that. And we really believe that there are ways to automate the actual testing of the ingested evidence as well, that can really help. So we're focused on solving for that part of control management and automation. And from there, inevitably, you're going to find issues. What you need to make sure is that they're remediated and that you can track them effectively. And it's hard to do when it's in a fragmented text app of spreadsheets and email and the like. And so making sure that there's all of these things work really well at the control level. We think, all right, once you get this right, it really enables an organization to solve for a lot of the other things they're worried about. If you're actually managing this control really well, and the platform is actually sitting there and helping you really manage the control, now you have a much clearer understanding of where your risk are actually heading. Are they trending in a positive or negative direction? And at least you can start to take actions to understand how to mitigate that risk or be more proactive about making sure that the controls are being run and managed actively there. Good control management ultimately is really what helps facilitate and understand whether your compliance efforts are working effectively. And then inevitably, we all go through audits. They're an important part of the process. Collecting all the evidence, making sure that everything is operating as expected, and really working with the auditing community on it. Good control management and automation means that a lot of the evidence, everything that you need in support of an audit, has been running already, and it's there to basically lever on behalf of that audit as well. And then we think that when you combine kind of risk and compliance, a lot of times we think about security at a very technical level, but ultimately security of an organization takes on a lot of different forms. Physical security is an example, and what we're doing, as organizations at the control level, ultimately when you think about it on a metadata level, it can extrapolate to give you probably the best overall perspective of how security assurance is working within your organization. And so we think that there are ways to take what's happening at the control level and support that too. Just a couple of critical success factors in relationship to a CommOps platform, if you're ever considering these things. One, not surprisingly, with software, it should be intuitive. It should be easy, for people to adopt, and that's one important part. But I think another important part, and maybe a little bit, many software companies are a little bold in thinking that everybody's going to adopt their solution. At Hyperproof, we don't actually look at it that way. The right way to think about all of this is to engage people where they already work. So many people that play a very important part in compliance and security and heading off risk don't work. Their compliance or security is not in their title. But they work in different solutions, whether that's Jira or otherwise. So engage them there. Don't force them to actually adopt a different product to do the work. And so we think an important critical success factor is the solution needs to engage people where they work. It also needs to facilitate collaboration. The fourth bullet point's an important one, and it's very broad, where the product, the solution needs to seamlessly work with your ecosystem. And when we think about ecosystem, we're actually thinking about it in three different ways. One is certainly with your infrastructure. We've talked about automating evidence collection. Well, if it doesn't play well with all of the rest of your infrastructure, it's not going to work. You can't automate it. And so that's one point of view on seamlessly working with your ecosystem. Another point of view on it is, you work with auditing firms. That solution should ultimately work and facilitate that work really well with third parties. Another piece is vendor management and actually making sure your third party community can actually sit there and work and seamlessly with you as well. And so we that seamless nature of a product just fitting within your infrastructure and your broader ecosystem is really important to making this all happen. And the final piece that I've been pretty relentless on is automation. As much that can be automated should be automated. So just moving on there, hopefully that all held together, everybody. I'm sorry, that's a lot of Matt talking. I guess it's going to be a lot of Matt talking until about 11:50. But some just key principles of CommOps, and this is going to feel a little repetitive, so I'll move through this pretty quick. But as we stated above, start with the risk in mind. first, and ultimately, then put the controls in place to mitigate the risk, and then ultimately relever those controls to support your compliance functions. Um, again, I think, this is more for the leaders of organizations than anything. I know everybody on this call already knows it. There is no finish line to what we're doing. And I think it's just so important that they understand that, and that they make continual investments in it and recognize that it's for the better of the organization overall. Obviously, it's a shared, as I've talked about previously too. It's, compliance, security, managing risk. It's an organizational wide activity. It's a team sport. It's not an individual sport. And again, kind of pivoting to the other concepts of operationalizing everything, actually moving to and adopting some DevOps concepts in relationship to ComOps is important. So whether it's sprints or standardization or automation, leveraging those types of DevOps concepts in the relationship to the work we do, we think is really important to solving the problem. And then ultimately measuring and making sure we're continuously improving. I know all of us is in our personal lives and in our professional lives, we're doing that. And obviously organizationally, we should be thinking about it that way too. So hopefully that was helpful. I know that was a lot of information to absorb. I really appreciate everybody taking a little bit of time to listen to that. I think with that, we're going to pivot to just a brief demo. I'm going to keep it to about 19 minutes to make sure we have ample time, or at least the 10 minutes at the end of the hour, to answer any questions you may have. So with that, I'm going to share my screen and actually do a brief demo of Hyperproof. All right, so the first question for everybody is just, and I guess JC, it's really to you, since I think you're the person that I can speak to right now, is that you can see my screen. I just want to confirm
Yes,
that.
I can.
Okay, great. So everybody, just to kind of talk before we jump straight into product, everything we just talked about is on our mind at Hyperproof all the time. And we are really focused on creating that ComOps platform that facilitates and helps work through so many of the challenges we enumerated in the deck or in the presentation just a second ago. And so where we are right now is Hyperproof. And I won't spend a lot of time explaining dashboards and these types of things. I think the one thing to understand, and that we've tried to always think about in relationship to any dashboard, is the personas and what type of information needs to be provided at different levels. The whole point of the overview is the ability to sit there and really provide that 30,000-foot view of how are your programs actually operating, how are your controls operating, how are audits going. And we are going to layer in the risk component in here very soon, because obviously with as much as we've talked about it, it should be here. But it's really that 30,000-foot view. The only other thing I would highlight is, it's important to be able to slice and dice and isolate information in relationship to different criteria that might, that different stakeholders might be interested in. And so we've constructed the Explore By area that helps you filter the information to the left of a dashboard all the time. You'll see this repeatedly through the product. And it's just important to be able to sit there and actually filter and look at different things in different ways. And this really helps facilitate that. And it is very customizable as you add custom fields in Hyperproof. You can actually add custom fields to these Explore By areas so that you can filter by more and more, different criteria that you define. And so that flexibility to allow you to slice and dice, in this case, you can see how I've configured it, but it's just important to know that that's available to you and that a solution of ComOps platform should provide that type of flexibility. I'm not going to really jump into my work with the limited amount of time we have, but my work, just to highlight it, is just the area that you can actually sit there and look at all the tasks that are being distributed across your organization and understand how they're proceeding. I'm going to jump to this programs area, and this is the what you see here is what I've actually constructed in this particular software demonstration. And And you can see like the art of what's possible with Hyperproof and the different types of frameworks you can actually adhere to with Hyperproof here. So whether it's the standard information security frameworks that you're all familiar with, or the privacy frameworks, but even things like Sarbanes-Oxley from a kind of financial perspective, or even ESG, which is a really hot topic these days. There are a lot of different frameworks that can be facilitated and managed in Hyperproof. To highlight just a couple of things related to what we talked about earlier, for one, in Hyperproof, we're always adding additional frameworks and content as a starting point for organizations so that they have an easier way to get started than going to the internet and trying to figure it out or hiring a consultant to do it. But I think the important thing I want to highlight here is when we think about content and these frameworks, we talked a lot about some of the inefficiency that organizations intersect with. And we think it's really important to help facilitate and make sure that duplicative controls, as an example, if you remember that from the presentation, don't happen. What we've done is we've actually relationally mapped where the requirements of frameworks overlap with one another. Why did we do that? We did that because that helps organizations reuse their control set in support of the next framework. And what we do every night is actually calculate, based on what you've deployed in Hyperproof, how close are you to basically being able to relever what you've already done in support of another framework. And so you'll notice this jumpstart calculation is what we refer to it as. But the jumpstart calculation is actually calculating, hey, how much can I reuse the controls in support of, in this case, FedRAMP, or you can see some of the other frameworks that are out there. But the whole idea is that, hey, it's hard to figure these things out. It's hard to understand what the next logical step in our compliance journey should be. And then it's also hard to construct what would be called a unified control framework in support of these things. We're trying to work with our customers to sit there and facilitate and make that possible. And this is one way that we've done it. Just jumping ahead, I'm going to jump into this SOC 2 framework and just highlight a couple of things here, just keeping an eye on the time. So now we're in our SOC 2 Type 2 program. And we talked about it earlier. The first part of what I was talking about at a control automation and management level was that assessment cadence. And so at Hyperproof, what we've put out there is this concept of freshness. Freshness is really the ability to establish the cadence that you want to reassess controls at. And you can see it here in the dashboard. You can see that 4 of our controls have actually expired. In this case, any of our dashboards you can click through and actually see a filtered list in order to facilitate and go to the places where there might be problems. In this case, we can also see in this works needs attention area, what those actual either labels or controls are that are expired. I'm going to go ahead and click on this ISO control. And you may ask, like, why is an ISO control in SOC 2? Well, it goes back to what I just talked about previously about actually relevering controls in support of other frameworks. Here we're re-leveraging an ISO control in support of an ISO, in support of a SOC 2 requirement. I'm going to click on this ISO control, and I just wanted to highlight a couple of things for you. For one is freshness. Just very quickly, I talked about freshness. It's very easy to set up in Hyperproof. What you're establishing is the cadence that you want to reassess a control on. In this case, I've set it for 30 days. What does that really mean? What Hyperproof is doing behind the scenes is actually making sure that these people up here understand, when they're supposed to get back in and actually reassess the control. One of the challenges we've seen with a lot of organizations, JC, do you mind muting? There's a little bit of background noise. But it's hard to sit there and make sure that everybody stays on top of things. Well, let Hyperproof do the work. It notifies this team that it's time to get back out there and reassess, and ultimately keeps everybody on task, which is hard to do sometimes when you're talking about 100 controls. So that's just freshness very quickly. A couple of things about other concepts that we talked about evidence gathering, and we recognize not everything it can be automated, but at the same time, back to letting people work where they are, conduct the work where they already live, versus versus asking them to adopt a new solution. I just wanted to highlight an example of that. Here, what I've done is I've created a task where I want an individual within the organization to supply a piece of evidence, but they don't actually use Hyperproof. They live in Jira. And so in this case, you can see that, the task has been created in Hyperproof, but then we actually went ahead and sent it to Jira, to the correct project over in Jira. I went ahead and opened up Jira over here. And so this is our Jira instance, and I'm just going to demonstrate, and I just want to draw your attention to, you'll notice that right now it hasn't been started. There is no evidence attached. And as I go over to Jira, I can actually conduct the work in Jira. I'm going to attach our SOC 2 Type 2 report just for fun. And I'm going to go ahead and say, you know what? I'm done with my work here, and establish that. And as I go back here, and our synchronization is every couple of minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and hit sync now versus waiting. But what you'll see is that the actual status has changed to submitted based on what happened in Jira. And also it's brought over the piece of evidence that I attached. Assuming that I'm comfortable with this piece of evidence, and that I want to go ahead and add it as something to go ahead and assess now or test, I'm going to go ahead and mark it as closed. At that point, the ticket's closed, and the actual piece of evidence that I just attached has been actually collected in our proof area for testing. And so that's just one example of, yes, it's a little bit of manual, evidence gathering, but it's inevitably that's going to be part of it. The important part is that critical success factor around letting people work where they already live. Is just, we feel very passionate about making sure that that happens, and wanted to demonstrate a little bit about how we're actually making sure it does. And so that's one example. I did want to highlight the other piece that we're doing in relationship to evidence collection. We're always, focused on how do we actually streamline that, because it consumes so many hours within organizations, and it's a non-value added task. So we've created a concept called hypersyncs. We're constantly integrating to more and more infrastructure related apps that contain evidence that is, we need to collect in support of either risk management or compliance management. And so in this instance, you can see the palette of what I've got instantiated in our instance. We're always adding more and more to this. But I'm going to go ahead and just click on this AWS as an example. This is our AWS test service. And what we've done is we know what services are being used within AWS. We go ahead and select the particular service. Then what we've done is we've actually mapped what types of evidence reside in that service that could be utilized in support of either risk management or compliance management. And in this case, we can see the different types of evidence. I'm going to go ahead and select the account password policy just to select something right now. And I'm going to click next, and I'm going to, we can decide if we just want to do it once or if we want to do it automatically. We can decide how often we would like to collect that evidence. And also we can decide whether we want it to version or whether we want it to be a new file. In this case, I'll select new file. And I'll press next and hit save and sync. What's happening now is Hyperproof is actually going out to the AWS instance that I've authenticated to, and actually collecting the password policy. You can see that this piece of toast has notified me that it's here. And if I go to the proof area, I can actually see the password policy collected from AWS. And I can even open up that password policy to take a look at what's in there. This is part one of Hyperproof's journey around, automating the evidence collection, but our journey is even bigger than that. We plan later on this year to actually roll out the ability to test the evidence that's being brought in via these hypersyncs, and ultimately to change the state of the control to healthy, or to notify people if there are issues, specifically this face pile right here. So you'll see those things in Hyperproof as we finish up the year, and we'll continue to expand and enter into more and more complicated use cases. But we feel it's so important to sit there and solve for these things and ultimately get to a place where you can automate a control and make it more of an exception-based activity versus this heavy lift that everybody's having to perform today. So that's just a quick example there. I will go ahead and just mark this control as fresh. I know I'm shortcutting it, and this is not the right way to do it. But if I mark it as fresh, we go back to our program. What we've done is we see that there are now only 3 expired controls that need assessment, and we keep on working in that regard. So that's just an example of some of the things that we're doing in support of what we talked about in on the challenges side earlier. And I thought that would be helpful for everybody to actually see and witness here. A couple of other things just to highlight. We talked about the risk, and what we've done in Hyperproof is actually created a risk register where you can enumerate all the risk that your organization are exposed to. You can also group by or categorize those risks in different ways. And because I just went and changed the state of that control, I just eliminated one of the risks I actually wanted to highlight. So it's a little bit of a bummer. I just did that. So let me work at it from a slightly different angle. I apologize, everybody. But now I need to go find my actual ISO control again, and I'm gonna have to. This got messy quick, but I'm gonna change the state of the actual control just to manhandle it a little bit and say that the control is critical. And for demo purposes, I'm gonna say, whoops, it's always hard to spell when you're in front of an audience. But we'll hit save. We'll go back to risk. And by what we've done is we've actually allowed you to tie the risk to the underlying controls. And so that's really what I wanted to highlight here. You can enumerate like the likelihood of you incurring the risk, the impact of it. But most importantly, it's tying the risk back to the underlying controls that were meant to mitigate it. And we allow you to actually sit there and do that within Hyperproof. So as you start with the risk in mind, you can start creating the controls that are meant to mitigate them, and you can tie those controls to the risk. You can also tie those controls to the frameworks or requirements within those frameworks that they're supposed to help resolve for too. So it's really going back to that picture that I was talking about, well-constructed controls and control management, the ability to tie those to the different respective higher level spots, whether that's risk or compliance frameworks or audits. It's basically making sure that all of that works. And you can see here that the actual risk health is critical. And if we actually went and changed, the actual, if I go and manhandle it again and change it to healthy, and I'm going to be very quick here and just type in some brief initials, change that back to healthy. And if we go back to the underlying risk, the risk is actually moved back to healthy as well. So it's being able to, in real time, look at how these risks are trending, whether they're moving in the right direction or the wrong direction, and helping facilitate that part of the process for companies and organizations. And there are a variety of other things we put in place. I know we've only got a minute or two left here with regards to the demo, but we, as far as evidence reuse, the ability, labels in our vernacular are a container that houses a particular type of evidence, but you can take that container and actually associate it with as many controls that might require that evidence. So how do you enable evidence reuse? We've leveraged this concept of labels in Hyperproof to do that. When you need to engage your auditor and manage the project that is an audit, you can create that audit in Hyperproof and actually sit there and manage all of the requests, all the people that need to comply, and you can relever the evidence that you've been gathering in support of your control management side of things. So you don't have to sit there and go look everywhere. You can leverage the evidence that's already been collected in support of other things, in support of your audit. And then ultimately vendors, as I talked about, are an important part of actually managing our risk anymore. And so the ability to sit there and actually manage your vendors, make sure that they are actually taking security seriously as well, and to re-engage them and test them periodically. we've basically leveraged and put all of that into Hyperproof too. So I know that that is an incredibly fast 19-minute walkthrough of Hyperproof, highlighting a lot of different things. But ultimately, it's all in support of solving a lot of the problems that we spoke to earlier in the presentation. And we feel, we're super excited about our journey. And at the same time, we're super passionate about, understanding, all the challenges out there. So with that, I'll stop the software demonstration. I'll stop sharing as well, I guess, and pivot back and see if there are any questions with regards to either what we talked about earlier or with regards to Hyperproof. And sorry, JC, I have to change my camera one more time. Hang on there. I'm coming back. Hang on, everybody. Sorry. There.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate that presentation and demo. Let's see if there are any questions. We'd love to hear them from you. I guess the first one that's come in is, if our team has been managing our compliance program in spreadsheets, how difficult would it take to implement Hyperproof?
Great question. Get asked that one a lot. So really, I don't ever want to, I think that the straightforward answer is it's very straightforward to. So we've allowed for a lot of basically uploading spreadsheets in order to basically instantiate your program in Hyperproof very quickly. So generally speaking, working with our customer success team, we can take someone's bespoke program or specific program that where they've got other controls defined and structure it in the right way for basically import. Generally, we can, unless it's something really complex, we can generally do that in an hour or two, working with you. And then it's really about importing that program and then instantiating a variety of things. But we, depending on the complexity, we've seen people up and running in Hyperproof in a week. If it's a much more complex use case where it's a lot of different frameworks, we can still get one program up and running in a week. But obviously, we would want to talk through the sequencing of the additional frameworks to make sure we accomplish business objectives and get to good outcomes there. But we realize, that there's a cutover that has to occur. And we've done a bunch of things to sit there and streamline that cutover and make it easy for our customers to start getting value from the product very quickly. Hopefully that answered the question. If it didn't, please feel free to just reach out to me directly, and I'm happy to jump into the weeds on that one.
Next question we have is for organizations who need more kind of assistance because they're new to certain frameworks like SOC 2, does Hyperproof provide or any assistance with getting those certifications or frameworks?
We do. Is I guess I could just stop there, but I'll expand on that particular answer. I mean, the short answer is yes, but the longer answer is, I talked about the ecosystem multiple times, but I'm going to focus on the ecosystem that's supposed to support organizations. And we've developed partnerships with a lot of different auditing firms and consultancies to really help facilitate this. We've even come up with packaged solutions where it's a combination of software and services for companies that are just getting started. But organizations like Shellman, Grant Thornton, Bonadeo, a lot of different auditing firms we are partnering with to provide basically constructed solutions to sit there and solve those types of things. We're one part of that solution, but obviously subject matter experts that know those things and that test for those things are an important part of it. And so that's the reason we, on a partnering level, have really engaged and worked so heavily with the community to develop offerings that can meet all of your needs. So I think the short answer is yes. The longer answer is, that in relationship to what we've done on a partnering level to sit there and help facilitate that.
Got it. So thank you. Next question. There's a lot of GRC software vendors in the market. What sets Hyperproof apart from the others?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I guess for one, I mean, I really look at this extreme focus on control management and automation. That's not been the approach, certainly from traditional GRC solutions that have been in the market for sometimes decades. That was not the approach they took. And in our point of view, so much of the heavy lifting is at the control level. And so we're extremely focused on that control automation piece, because we feel like if organizations can unlock and automate more of that, then it starts to really facilitate and make other aspects of either managing risk or managing compliance frameworks and adhering to them, or even in support of audits, do that extremely well. And that's really what changes the game for organizations overall. And I think that that's one of our key differentiators. The other one that I would look to is just understanding kind of the overlap between all of these things really well, and how to sit there and facilitate and scale as organizations grow, and thinking through that piece of it is equally critical to solving the larger problems. And so whether it's some of the crosswalking that I spoke to earlier, or other aspects between how controls should connect to the fabric of all of it, the risk, the audits, the compliance frameworks, is another differentiator with Hyperproof.
Great. Well, those are all the questions that have come in. So I guess we can wrap up. Before we do, though, I did want to mention that, we wanted to show there are a few resources that Matt has talked about today. If you want to learn more about the compliance operations principles at depth, we have a guide on our website you can check out. If you want to check out kind of how, organizations from 2020 are managing their IT compliance programs and what they're doing, we have some benchmarks on our website as well. And, as Matt said, if you have additional questions about Hyperproof, he would love to chat further. So you can see his contact information there. With that, I just want to say thank you to Matt and thank you to everyone for attending today. We appreciate it. Hope that this was useful to you, and thank you. Have a good day.
Yeah, not just very quickly too, I just want to kind of reiterate the thanks, guys. I just I just want to thank everybody for your time. I know everybody's really busy. Really appreciate the questions. Really appreciate your attention throughout all this, and just your interest in what we're talking about. And hopefully there's an opportunity to connect and talk about things outside of this webinar. But again, thank you, and happy Thursday, and have a productive rest of the week, and enjoy your weekend when we get there. Thank you very much. All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.